The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Book 2, Part 1, Anthropogenesis, stanzas translated with commentaries, from the Secret Book of John. Stanza 10, the history of the fourth race. Verse 38. Thus, 2 by 2, on the 7 zones, the third race gave birth to the fourth race man. The gods became no gods, Sura became Asura. To understand this verse 38, it must be read together with the 3 verses of stanza 9. Up to this point of evolution, man belongs more to metaphysical than physical nature. It is only after the so-called fall that the races began to develop rapidly into a purely human shape. And in order that he may correctly comprehend the full meaning of the fall, so mystic and transcendental is it in its real significance, the student must be told at once the details which preceded this event, of which event modern theology has formed a pivot on which its most pernicious and absurd dogmas and beliefs are made to turn. The archaic commentaries explain, as the reader must remember, that the host of Dionysus, whose turn it was to incarnate as the egos of the immortal, but on this plain senseless monads, that some, quote, obeyed, unquote, the law of evolution immediately when the men of the third race became physiologically and physically ready, that is, when they had separated into sexes. These were those early conscious beings who, now adding conscious knowledge and will to their inherent divine purity, created by Kriya Shakti, the semi-divine man, who became the seed on earth for future adepts. Those, on the other hand, who, jealous of their intellectual freedom, unfettered as it then was by the bonds of matter, said, "We can choose, we have wisdom." See verse 24. And incarnated far later, these had their first karmic punishment prepared for them. They got bodies physiologically inferior to their astral models because their chayas had belonged to progenitors of an inferior degree of the 7 classes. As to those sons of wisdom who had deferred their incarnation till the fourth race, which was already tainted physiologically with sin and impurity, they produced a terrible cause, the karmic result of which weighs on them to this day. It was produced in themselves, and they became the carriers of that seed of iniquity for aeons to come, because the bodies they had to inform had become defiled through their own procrastination. See verses 32 and 36. This was the fall of the angels because of their rebellion against karmic law. The fall of man was no fall, for he was irresponsible, but creation, having been invited on the dualistic system as the prerogative of God alone, the legitimate attribute patented by theology in the name of an infinite deity of their own making, this power had to be regarded as satanic and as an usurpation of divine rights. Thus the foregoing, in the light of such narrow views, must naturally be considered as a terrible slander on man, created in the image of God, a still more dreadful blasphemy in the face of the dead-letter dogma. Your doctrine, the occultists were already told, makes of man created out of dust in the likeness of his God a vehicle of the devil from the first. Why did you make of your God a devil, both, moreover, created in your own image, is our reply. The esoteric interpretation of the Bible, however, sufficiently refutes this slanderous invention of theology. The secret doctrine must some day become the just karma of the churches, more anti-Christian than the representative assemblies of the most confirmed materialists and atheists. The old doctrine about the true meaning of the fallen angels in its anthropological and evolutionary sense is contained in the Kabbalah and explains the Bible. It is found preeminent in Genesis when the letter is read in a spirit of research for truth, with no eye to dogma and in no mood of preconception. This is easily proven. In Genesis 6, the sons of God, Bnei Elohim, become enamored of the daughters of men, marry, and reveal to their wives the mysteries unlawfully learnt by them in heaven, according to Enoch. And this is the fall of angels. Note, In general, the so-called Orthodox Christian conceptions about the fallen angels or Satan are as remarkable as they are absurd. About a dozen could be cited of the most various character as to details, and all from the pen of educated lay authors, university graduates of the present quarter of our century. Thus the author of Earth's Earliest Ages, J. H. Pember, M.A., devotes a thick volume to proving theosophists, spiritualists, metaphysicians, agnostics, mystics, poets, and every contemporary author on Oriental speculation to be the devoted servants of the prince of the air, and irretrievably damned. He describes Satan and his Antichrist in this wise, quote, "Satan is the anointed cherub of old. God created Satan, the fairest and wisest of all his creatures in this part of his universe, and made him prince of the world and of the power of the air. He was placed in an Eden which was both far anterior to the Eden of Genesis, and of an altogether different and more substantial character, resembling the New Jerusalem. Thus, Satan being perfect in wisdom and beauty, his vast empire is our earth, if not the whole solar system. Certainly no other angelic power of greater or even equal dignity has been revealed to us. The Archangel Michael himself is quoted by Jude as preserving towards the Prince of Darkness the respect due to a superior, however wicked he may be, until God has formally commanded his deposition." Unquote. Then we are informed that, quote, "Satan was from the moment of his creation surrounded by the insignia of royalty," within brackets double exclamation mark. That he awoke to consciousness to find the air filled with the rejoicing music of those whom God had appointed. Then the devil passes from his royalty to his priestly dignity, within brackets triple exclamation mark. Satan was also a priest of the Most High, etc., etc. And now Antichrist will be Satan incarnate, pages 56 to 59. The pioneers of the coming Apollyon have already appeared. They are the Theosophists, the Occultists, the authors of the perfect way, of Isis Unveiled, of the mystery of the ages, and even of the light of Asia. The author notes the avowed origin of Theosophy from the descending angels, from the Nephilim, or the angels of the 6th chapter of Genesis, and the giants. He ought to note his own descent from them also, as the present secret doctrine endeavors to show, unless he refuses to belong to the present humanity. End of note. But what is, in reality, the Book of Enoch itself, from which the author of Revelation and even the St. John of the 4th Gospel have so profusely quoted? For example, verse 8 in chapter 10, about all who have come before Jesus being thieves and robbers. Simply a book of initiation, given out in allegory and cautious phraseology, the program of certain archaic mysteries performed in the inner temples. The author of the sacred mysteries among the Mayas and Quiches very justly suggests that the so-called visions of Enoch relate to his, Enoch's, experience at initiation and what he learned in the mysteries, while he very erroneously states his opinion that Enoch had learned them before being converted to Christianity, within brackets double exclamation mark. Furthermore, he believes that this book was written at the beginning of the Christian era, when the customs and religion of the Egyptians fell into decadency. This is hardly possible, since Jude quotes in his epistle from the Book of Enoch, verse 14, and therefore, as Archbishop Lawrence, the translator of the Book of Enoch from the Ethiopic version, remarked, it could not have been the production of a writer who lived after, or was even coeval with, the writers of the New Testament, unless indeed Jude and the Gospels and all that follows was also a production of the already established Church, which some critics say is not impossible. But we are now concerned with the fallen angels of Enoch, rather than with Enoch himself. In Indian exotericism, these angels, asuras, are also denounced as the enemies of the gods. those who oppose sacrificial worship offered to the latter. In Christian theology, they are broadly referred to as the fallen spirits, the heroes of various conflicting and contradictory legends about them, gathered from pagan sources. The Colubert tortoiseux, the tortoise snake, a qualification said to have originated with the Jews, had quite another meaning before the Roman Church distorted it, among others a purely astronomical meaning. The serpent fallen from on high, de orsum fluens, was credited with the possession of the keys of the empire of the dead, to that day when Jesus saw it falling like lightning from heaven. Luke 10:17-18. The Roman Catholic interpretation of cadebat ut fulgur to the contrary, notwithstanding, and it means indeed that even the devils are subject to the Logos, who is wisdom, but who, as the opponent of ignorance, is Satan or Lucifer at the same time. This remark refers to divine wisdom falling like lightning on and quickening the intellects of those who fight the devils of ignorance and superstition. Up to the time when wisdom, in the shape of the incarnating spirits of Mahat, descended from on high to animate and call the third race to real conscious life, humanity, if it can be so called in its animal senseless state, was of course doomed to moral as well as to physical death. The angels fallen into generation are referred to metaphorically as serpents and dragons of wisdom. On the other hand, regarded in the light of the Logos, the Christian Savior, like Krishna, whether as man or Logos, may be said to have saved those who believed in the secret teachings from eternal death, to have conquered the kingdom of darkness, or hell, as every initiate does. This in the human terrestrial form of the initiates, and also because the Logos is Christos, that principle of our inner nature which develops in us into the spiritual ego, the higher self, being formed of the indissoluble union of Buddhi, the sixth, and the spiritual efflorescence of Manas, the fifth principle. Note: it is not correct to refer to Christ, as some theosophists do, as the sixth principle in man, Buddhi. The latter per se is a passive and latent principle, the spiritual vehicle of Atman, inseparable from the manifested universal soul. It is only in union and in conjunction with self-consciousness that Buddhi becomes the higher self and the divine discriminating soul. Christos is the seventh principle, if anything. End of note. The Logos is passive wisdom in heaven and conscious self-active wisdom on earth, we are taught. It is the marriage of heavenly man with the virgin of the world, nature, as described in Pimander, the result of which is their progeny, immortal man. It is this which is called in St. John's Revelation the marriage of the Lamb with his bride, 19:7. That wife is now identified with the Church of Rome, owing to the arbitrary interpretation of her votaries. But they seem to forget that her linen may be fine and white outwardly, like the whitened sepulchre, but that the rottenness she is inwardly filled with is not the righteousness of saints, verse 8, same source, but rather the blood of the saints she has slain upon the earth, chapter 18, verse 24. Thus the remark made by the great initiate in Luke, chapter 10, verse 18, one that referred allegorically to the ray of enlightenment and reason falling like lightning from on high into the hearts and minds of the converts to that old wisdom religion, then presented in a new form by the wise Galilean adept, was distorted out of recognition, as was his own personality, and made to fit in with one of the most cruel as the most pernicious of all theological dogmas. Vide at the end of stanza 11, Satanic Myths. Note on the wise Galilean adept. To make it plainer, anyone who reads that passage in Luke will see that the remark follows the report of the 70, who rejoice that even the devils, the spirit of controversy and reasoning, or the opposing power, since Satan means simply adversary or opponent, are subject unto us through thy name. Luke chapter 10, verse 17. Now, thy name means the name of Christos, or Logos, or the spirit of true divine wisdom, as distinct from the spirit of intellectual or mere materialistic reasoning, the higher self, in short. And when Jesus remarks to this that he has beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven, it is a mere statement of his clairvoyant powers, notifying then that he already knew it, and a reference to the incarnation of the divine ray, the gods or angels, which fall into generation. For not all men by any means benefit by that incarnation, and with some the power remains latent and dead during the whole life. Truly, no man knoweth who the Son is but the Father, and who the Father is but the Son, as added by Jesus then and there. Same source, verse 22. The Church of Christ less than anyone else. The initiates alone understood the secret meaning of the term Father and the Son, and knew that it referred to spirit and soul on the earth. For the teachings of Christ were occult teachings, which could only be explained at the initiation. They were never intended for the masses. For Jesus forbade the 12 to go to the Gentiles and the Samaritans, Matthew chapter 10, verse 8, and repeated to his disciples that the mysteries of heaven were for them alone, not for the multitudes. Mark chapter 4, verse 11. End of note. But if Western theology alone holds the patent for and copyright of Satan, in all the dogmatic horror of that fiction, other nationalities and religions have committed equal errors in their misinterpretation of this tenet, which is one of the most profoundly philosophical and ideal conceptions of ancient thought. For they have both disfigured and hinted at the correct meaning of it in their numerous allegories touching the subject. Nor have the semi-esoteric dogmas of Puranic Hinduism failed to evolve the very suggestive symbols and allegories concerning the rebellious and fallen gods. The Puranas teem with them, and we find a direct hint at the truth in the frequent allusions of Parashara in Vishnu Purana to all those Rudras, Rishis, Asuras, Kumaras, and Munis having to be born in every age to reincarnate in every Manvantara. This, esoterically, is equivalent to saying that the flames born of the universal mind, Mahat, owing to the mysterious workings of karmic will and an impulse of evolutionary law, had, as in Pimanda, without any gradual transition, landed on this earth, having broken through the 7 circles of fire, or the 7 intermediate worlds, in short. There is an eternal cyclic law of rebirths, and the series is headed at every new Manvantaric dawn by those who had enjoyed their rest from reincarnations in previous kalpas for incalculable aeons, by the highest and the earliest nirvanis. It was the turn of those gods to incarnate in the present Manvantara, hence their presence on earth and the ensuing allegories, hence also the perversion of the original meaning. Note, so for instance in the Puranas, Pulastya, a Prajapati or son of Brahma, the progenitor of the Rakshasas and the grandfather of Ravana, the great king of Lanka, see Ramayana, had in a former birth a son named Datoli, who is now known as the sage Agastya, says Vishnu Purana. This name of Datuli alone has 6 more variants to it, or 7 meanings. He is called respectively Datui, Datali, Datuti, Datori, Datobri, Dambobi, and Damboli, which 7 variants have each a secret sense and refer in the esoteric comments to various ethnological classifications, and also to physiological and anthropological mysteries of the primitive races. For surely the Rakshasas are not demons, but simply the primitive and ferocious giants, the Atlanteans, who were scattered on the face of the globe as the 5th race is now. Vashista is a warrant to this, if his words addressed to Parasara, who attempted a bit of jadoo, sorcery, which he calls sacrifice for the destruction of the Rakshasas, mean anything. For he says, let no more of these unoffending spirits of darkness be destroyed. See for details Adiparvan, Sloka 176, Mahabharata, also the Linga Purana, Puravarda, Sloka 64. End of note. The gods who had fallen into generation, whose mission it was to complete divine man, are found represented later on as demons, evil spirits and fiends, at feud and war with gods, or the irresponsible agents of the one eternal law, but no conception of such creatures as the devils and Satan of the Christian, Jewish and Mohammedan religions was ever intended under those 1001 Aryan allegories. See the fallen angels and the mystic dragons in Part 2. Note, we have a passage from a master's letter which has a direct bearing upon these incarnating angels. Says the letter, "Now there are and there must be failures in the ethereal races of the many classes of Jiankochans or Devas, progressed entities of a previous planetary period, as well as among men. But still, as the failures are too far progressed and spiritualized to be thrown back forcibly from Jiankoshanship into the vortex of new primordial evolution through the lower kingdoms, this then happens. Where a new solar system has to be evolved, these Jiankochans are born in by influx ahead of the elementals, entities to be developed into humanity at a future time, and remain as a latent or inactive spiritual force in the aura of a nascent world, until the stage of human evolution is reached. Then they become an active force and commingle with the elementals to develop little by little the full type of humanity, that is to say, to develop in and endow man with his self-conscious mind, or manas." End of note. The true esoteric view about Satan, the opinion held on this subject by the whole philosophic antiquity, is admirably brought out in an appendix entitled "The Secret of Satan" to the second edition of Dr. A. Kingsford's Perfect Way. No better and clearer indication of the truth could be offered to the intelligent reader, and it is therefore quoted here at some length. 1. And on the seventh day, seventh creation of the Hindus, there went forth from the presence of God a mighty angel, full of wrath and consuming, and God gave him the dominion of the outmost sphere. Note, on the seventh day, seventh creation of the Hindus, when the earth with its planetary chain and man were to appear. And note on, God gave him the dominion of the outermost sphere, our earth and the physical plane of consciousness. End of note. Eternity brought forth time. The boundless gave birth to limit, being descended into generation. Note, when the pure celestial being, Jiankochan, and the great Pitris of various classes were commissioned, the one to evolve their images, Chaya, and make of them physical man, the others to inform and thus endow him with divine intelligence and the comprehension of the mysteries of creation. End of note. Among the gods is none like unto him, into whose hands are committed the kingdoms, the power and the glory of the worlds. 5. Thrones and empires, the dynasties of kings, the fall of nations, the birth of churches, the triumph of time. Note on the dynasties of kings. The dynasties of kings who all regard themselves as the anointed, reigning by the grace of God, whereas in truth they reign by the grace of matter, the great illusion, the deceiver. End of note. For, as said in Hermes, Satan is the doorkeeper of the temple of the king. He standeth in Solomon's porch. He holdeth the key of the sanctuary, that no man enter therein, save the anointed, having the arcanum of Hermes. Verse 20 and 21. These suggestive and majestic verses had reference with the ancient Egyptians and other civilized peoples of antiquity to the creative and generative light of the Logos, Horus, Brahma, Ahura Mazda, etc., etc., as primeval manifestations of the ever unmanifested principle, for example, Ein Sof, Parabrahm, or Zeruana Akerne, boundless time, Kala. But the meaning is now degraded in the Kabbalah. The anointed, who has the secrets and mysteries of Hermes, Buddha, or wisdom, and who alone is entrusted with the key to the sanctuary, the womb of nature, in order to fructify it and call to active life and being the whole cosmos, has become with the Jews Jehovah, the God of generation, on the lunar mountain, Sinai, the mountain of the moon, Sin. The sanctuary has become the Holy of Holies, and the arcanum has been anthropomorphized and phallicized and dragged down into matter indeed. Hence arose the necessity of making the dragon of wisdom the serpent of Genesis, of the conscious God, a God who needed a body to clothe his too subjective divinity, Satan. But the innumerable incarnations of spirit and the ceaseless pulse and current of desire refer, the first one, to our doctrine of karmic and cyclic rebirths, the second to Eros, not the later god of material physiological love, but to the divine desire in the gods as well as in all nature to create and give life to beings. This, the rays of the one dark, because invisible and incomprehensible, flame, could achieve only by themselves descending into matter. Therefore, as continued in the appendix 12, many names hath God given him, Satan, names of mystery, secret and terrible. 13. The adversary, because matter opposeth spirit, time accuseth even the saints of the Lord. And verses 28, 29, and 31, stand in awe of him, and sin not. Speak his name with trembling, for Satan is the magistrate of the justice of God, karma. He beareth the balance and the sword, for to him are committed weight and measure and number. Compare the last sentence with what the rabbi who explains the Kabbalah to Prince Al-Khazari in the book of that name says, and it will be found that the weight and measure and number are, in Sefer Jezira, the attributes of the Sephiroth, the three Sephrim, or figures, ciphers, covering the whole collective number of 10, and that the Sephiroth are the collective Adam Kadmon, the heavenly man, or the Logos. Thus Satan and the Anointed were identified in ancient thought. Therefore, in verse 33, Satan is the minister of God, Lord of the 7 mansions of Hades. The 7 or Saptaloka of the earth with the Hindus, for Hades, or the limbo of illusion of which theology makes a region bordering on hell, is simply our globe, the earth, and thus Satan is called, in verse 33, the angel of the manifest worlds. It is Satan who is the god of our planet and the only god, and this without any allusive metaphor to its wickedness and depravity, for he is one with the Logos, the first son, eldest of the gods, in the order of microcosmic divine evolution. Saturn, Satan astronomically, is the 7th and last in the order of macrocosmic emanation, being the circumference of the kingdom of which Phoebus, the light of wisdom, also the sun, is the center. The Gnostics were right then in calling the Jewish God an angel of matter, or he who breathed conscious life into Adam, and he whose planet was Saturn. Verse 34. And God hath put a girdle about his loins, the rings of Saturn, and the name of the girdle is Death. In anthropology, this girdle is the human body with its 2 lower principles, which 3 die while the innermost man is immortal. And now we approach the secret of Satan. In verses 37, 38, and 39, upon Satan only is the shame of generation. He hath lost his virginal estate, so hath the Kumara by incarnating. Uncovering heavenly secrets, he hath entered into bondage. He compasseth with bonds and limits all things. In verses 42, 43, and 44. Twain are the armies of God. In heaven the hosts of Michael. In the abyss, the manifested world, the legions of Satan. These are the unmanifest and the manifest, the free and the bound in matter, the virginal and the fallen, and both are the ministers of the Father, fulfilling the word divine. Therefore, in verse 55, holy is the Sabbath of God, blessed and sanctified is the name of the angel of Havas, Satan. For the glory of Satan is the shadow of the Lord, God in the manifested world. The throne of Satan is the footstool of Adonai, that footstool being the whole cosmos. Vide part 2, its pleroma, Satan's lair. When the Church, therefore, curses Satan, it curses the cosmic reflection of God. It anathematizes God made manifest in matter or in the objective. It maledicts God, or the ever-incomprehensible wisdom, revealing itself as light and shadow, good and evil in nature, in the only manner comprehensible to the limited intellect of man. This is the true philosophical and metaphysical interpretation of Samiel, or Satan, the adversary in the Kabbalah, the same tenets and spirit being found in the allegorical interpretations of every other ancient religion. This philosophical view does not interfere, however, with the historical records connected with it. We say historical because allegory and a mythical ornamentation around the kernel of tradition in no wise prevent that kernel being a record of real events. Thus the Kabbalah, repeating the time-honored revelations of the once universal history of our globe and the evolution of its races, has presented it under the legendary form of the various records which have formed the Bible. Its historical foundation is now offered, in however imperfect a form, on these pages from the secret doctrine of the East, and thus the allegorical and symbolical meaning of the serpent of Genesis is found explained by the sons of wisdom, or angels from higher spheres, though all and each pertain to the kingdom of Satan, or matter, revealing to men the mysteries of heaven. Hence also all the so-called myths of the Hindu, Grecian, Chaldean, and Jewish pantheons are found to be built on fact and truth. The giants of Genesis are the historical Atlanteans of Lanka and the Greek Titans. Who can forget that Troy was one upon a time proclaimed a myth, and Homer a non-existing personage, while the existence of such cities as Herculaneum and Pompeii was denied and attributed to mere fairy legends? Yet Schliemann proved that Troy had really existed, and the two cities, though buried for long ages under the Vesuvian lava, have had their resurrection day and live again on the surface of the earth. How many more cities and localities called fabulous are on the list of future discoveries? How many more personages regarded as mythical will one day become historical? Those alone can tell who read the decrees of fate in the astral light. Note, see the primeval manners of humanity. End of note. As the tenets of the Eastern doctrine, however, have always been kept secret, and as the reader can hardly hope to be shown the original texts unless he becomes an accepted disciple, let the Greek and Latin scholar turn to the original texts of the Hermetic literature. Let him, for one thing, read carefully the opening pages of the Poemander of Hermes Trismegistus, and then he will see our doctrines corroborated in it, however veiled its text. There also he will find the evolution of the universe, of our earth, called nature in Poemander, as of everything else, from the moist principle, or the great deep, father-mother, the first differentiation in the manifested cosmos. First, the universal mind, which the hand of the Christian translator has metamorphosed in the earliest renderings into God the Father. Then the heavenly man, which is the great total of that host of angels which was too pure for the creation of the inferior worlds, or of the man of our globe, but which fell nevertheless into matter by virtue of that same evolution, as the second logos of the Father. Notes. The heavenly man, please mark again the word, is the logos, or the Son esoterically. Therefore, once that the title was applied to Christ, declared God and the very God himself, Christian theology had no choice. In order to support its dogma of the personal Trinity, it had to proclaim, as it does, that the Christian Logos is the only true one, and that all the logoi of other religions were false, and only the masquerading evil principles. Satan. Now see where this led Western theology to. And note, the second Logos of the Father, for the mind a deity abounding in both sexes, being life and life, brought forth by its word another mind or workman, which, being God of the fire and the spirit, fashioned and formed 7 other governors, which in their circles contain the phenomenal world, and whose disposition is called fate or destiny. Section 9, Chapter 1, edition of 1579. Here it is evident that mind, the primeval universal divine thought, is neither unmanifested one, since it abounds in both sexes, is male and female, nor yet the Christian father, as the latter is a male and not an androgyne. The fact is that the Father, Son, and Man are hopelessly mixed up in the translations of Pimander. End of note. Synthetically, every creative logos, or the Son who is one with the Father, is the host of the Rectors Mundi in itself. Even Christian theology makes of the 7 angels of the presence the virtues, or the personified attributes of God, which, being created by him, as the Manas were by Brahma, became archangels. The Roman Catholic Theodice itself recognized in its creative verbum princeps the head of those angels, Caput Angelorum, and the Magni Concilii Angelus, the angel of the Great Council, thus recognizes the identity of Christ and those angels. The gods became no gods, the Sura Asura, says the text. That is, gods became fiends, Satan, when read literally. But Satan will now be shown in the teaching of the secret doctrine allegorized as good, and sacrifice a god of wisdom under different names. The Kabbalah teaches that pride and presumption, the 2 chief prompters of selfishness and egotism, are the causes that emptied heaven of 1/3 of its divine denizens, mystically, and of 1/3 of the stars, astronomically. In other words, the 2 statements are, the first an allegory, and the second a fact. The former, nevertheless, as shown, is intimately connected with humanity. In their turn, the Rosicrucians, who are well acquainted with the secret meaning of the tradition, kept it to themselves, teaching merely that the whole of creation was due to and the result of that legendary war in heaven, brought on by the rebellion of the angels against creative law, or the demiurge. Note: the allegory of the fire of Prometheus is another version of the rebellion of the proud Lucifer, who was hurled down to the bottomless pit, or simply unto our earth to live as man. The Hindu Lucifer, the Mahasura, is also said to have become envious of the Creator's resplendent light, and, at the head of inferior asuras, not gods but spirits, to have rebelled against Brahma, for which Shiva hurled him down to Patala. But as philosophy goes hand in hand with allegorical fiction in Hindu myths, the devil is made to repent and is afforded the opportunity to progress. He is a sinful man esoterically, and can, by yoga devotion and adeptship, reach his status of one with the deity once more. Hercules, the sun god, descends to Hades, the cave of initiation, to deliver the victims from their tortures, etc., etc. The Christian Church alone creates eternal torment for the devil and the damned that she has invented. End of note. The statement is correct, but the inner meaning is to this day a mystery. To elude further explanation of the difficulty by appealing to divine mystery or to the sin of prying into its policy is to say nothing at all. It may prove sufficient to believers in the Pope's infallibility, but will hardly satisfy the philosophical mind. Yet the truth, although known to most of the higher Kabbalists, has never been told by any of their number. One and all, Kabbalists and symbologists, showed an extraordinary reluctance to confess the primitive meaning of the fall of the angels. In a Christian such silence is only natural. Neither alchemist nor philosopher could, during the medieval ages, utter that which, in the sight of orthodox theology, was a terrible blasphemy, for it would have led them directly through the quote, holy unquote, office of the Inquisition to stake and rack. But for our modern Kabbalists and freethinkers, the case is different. With the latter, we fear, it is merely human pride, vanity, based on a loudly rejected and as ineradicable superstition, since the Church, in her struggle with Manichaeism, invented the devil, and by placing a theological extinguisher on the radiant star god, Lucifer, the, quote, son of the morning, unquote, thus created the most gigantic of all the paradoxes, a black and tenebrous light. The myth has struck its roots too deep in the soil of blind faith to permit in our age even those who do not acquiesce in her dogmas and laugh at her horned and cloven-footed Satan to come out bravely and confess the antiquity of the oldest of all traditions. In a few brief words it is this: semi-exoterically, the firstborn of the Almighty, Fiat Lux, or the angels of primordial light, were commanded to create. 1/3 of them rebelled and refused, while those who obeyed as Phetahil did failed, most signally. Note: why should, for instance, Eliphaz Levi, the very fearless and outspoken Kabbalist, have hesitated to divulge the mystery of the fallen angels, so-called? That he knew the fact and real meaning of the allegory, both in its religious and mystical, as well as in its psychological sense, is proved by his voluminous writings and frequent allusions and hints. Yet Eliphaz, after having alluded to it 100 times in his previous works, says in his latest, Histoire de la Magie, page 220, "We protest with all our might against the sovereignty and the ubiquity of Satan. We pretend neither to deny nor affirm here the tradition of the fall of the angels, but if so, then the prince of the angelic rebels can be at best the last and the most powerless among the condemned, now that he is separated from deity, which is the principle of every power." Unquote. This is hazy and evasive enough, but see what Hargrave Jennings writes in his weird, staccato-like style. Quote, "Both Saint Michael and Saint George are types. They are sainted personages, or dignified heroes, or powers apotheosized. They are each represented with their appropriate faculties and attributes. They are reproduced and stand multiplied, distinguished by different names in all the mythologies, including the Christian. The idea regarding each is a general one. This idea and representative notion is that of all-powerful champion, childlike in his virgin innocence, so powerful that this God-filled innocence, the seraphim know most, the cherubim love most, can shatter the world, articulated, so to use the word, in the magic of Lucifer, but condemned, in opposition to the artful constructions, this side life, of the magnificent apostate, the mighty rebel, but yet at the same time the light-bringer, the Lucifer, the morning star, the son of the morning, the very highest title out of heaven, for in heaven it cannot be, but out of heaven it is everything. In an apparently incredible side of his character, qualities are of no sex, this archangel, Saint Michael, is the invincible sexless celestial energy, to dignify him by his grand characteristics, the invisible virgin combatant clothed, and at the same time armed in the denying male of the Gnostic refusal to create. This is another myth within myths, a stupendous mystery of mysteries, because it is so impossible and contradictory, unexplainable as the Apocalypse, unrevealable as the Revelation." Unquote, from page 213. Nevertheless, this unexplainable and unrevealable mystery will now be explained and revealed by the doctrines of the East. But as the very erudite but still more puzzling author of Phalaisism gives it, of course no uninitiated mortal would ever understand the real drift of his remarks. End of note. To realize the refusal and failure in their correct physical meaning, one must study and understand Eastern philosophy. One has to be acquainted with the fundamental mystic tenets of the Vedantins with regard to the utter fallacy of attributing functional activity to the infinite and absolute deity. Esoteric philosophy maintains that during the sandhyas, the central sun emits creative light, passively, so to say. Causality is latent. It is only during the active periods of being that it gives rise to a stream of ceaseless energy, whose vibrating currents acquire more activity and potency with every rung of the hebdomadic ladder of being which they descend. Hence it becomes comprehensible how the process of creating, or rather of fashioning, the organic universe with all its units of the seven kingdoms necessitated intelligent beings who became collectively a being or creative God, differentiated already from the one absolute unity, unrelated as the latter is to conditioned creation. Note: creation out of a pre-existent eternal substance or matter, of course, which substance, according to our teachings, is boundless, ever-existing space. End of note. Now the Vatican manuscripts of the Kabbalah, a single copy of which in Europe is said to have been in the possession of Count Saint-Germain, contains the most complete exposition of the doctrine, including the peculiar version accepted by the Luciferians and other Gnostics. And in that parchment of the seven sons of life are given in the order they are found in the Sapta Surya. Note: the Luciferians, the sect of the 4th century, who are alleged to have taught that the soul was a carnal body transmitted to the child by its father, and that other religious and still earlier sect of the 2nd century A.D., the Lucianists, who taught all this and further that the animal soul was not immortal, were philosophizing on the grounds of the real Kabbalistic and occult teachings. End of note. Only 4 of these, however, are mentioned in the editions of the Kabbalah which are procurable in the public libraries, and that even in a more or less veiled phraseology. Nevertheless, even this reduced number is amply sufficient to show an identical origin as it refers to the quaternary group of the Giancochans, and proves the speculation to have had its origin in the secret doctrines of the Arians. As is well known, the Kabbalah never originated with the Jews, who got their ideas from the Chaldeans and the Egyptians. Thus even the now exoteric Kabbalistic teachings speak of a central sun, and of the 3 secondary suns in each solar system, our own included. As shown in that able, though too materialistic work, New Aspects of Life and Religion, which is a synopsis of the views of the Kabbalists in an aspect deeply thought out and assimilated. Quote: the central sun was to them as much as to the Aryans the center of the rest, the center to which all motion was to be ultimately referred. Round this central sun, the first of 3 systemic suns revolved on a polar plane, the second on an equatorial plane, and the third only was our visible sun. These 4 solar bodies were the organs on whose action what man calls the creation, the evolution of life on the planet Earth, depends. The channels through which the influence of these bodies was conveyed to the Earth they, the Kabbalists, held to be electrical, page 287. Quote, the radiant energy flowing from the central sun called the Earth into being as a watery globe, whose tendency, as the nucleus of a planetary body, was to rush to the central sun, within the sphere of whose attraction it had been created. But the radiant energy, similarly electrifying both, withheld the one from the other, and so changed motion towards into motion round the center of attraction, which the revolving planet, Earth, thus sought to reach. In the organic cell, the visible sun found its own proper matrix, and produced through this the animal, while maturing the vegetable kingdom, finally placing man at his head, in whom, though the animating section of that kingdom, it originated the psychic cell. But the man so placed at the head of the animal kingdom, at the head of the creation, was the animal, the soulless, the perishable man. Hence man, although apparently its crown, would by his advent have marked the close of creation, since creation, culminating in him, would at his death have entered into its decline. Unquote, on page 289. Note on the central sun. This central sun of the occultists, which even science is obliged to accept astronomically, for it cannot deny the presence in sidereal space of a central body in the Milky Way, a point unseen and mysterious, the ever-hidden center of attraction of our sun and system. This, quote, sun, unquote, is viewed differently by the occultists of the East. While the Western and Jewish Kabbalists, and even some pious modern astronomers, claim that in this sun the Godhead is specially present, referring to it the volitional acts of God, The Eastern initiates maintain that as the supra-divine essence of the unknown absolute is equal in every domain and place, the central sun is simply the center of the universal life electricity, the reservoir within which that divine radiance, already differentiated at the beginning of every creation, is focused. Though still in a laya, or neutral condition, it is nevertheless the one attracting, as also the ire-emitting, life center. End of note. This Kabbalistic view is here quoted to show its perfect identity and spirit with the Eastern doctrine. Explain or complete the teaching of the seven suns with the seven systems of planes of being, of which the suns are the central bodies, and you have the seven angelic planes, whose host are gods thereof collectively. See commentary to Stanza 7, Book 1. They are the head group divided into 4 classes from the incorporeal down to the semi-corporeal, which classes are directly connected, though in very different ways as regards voluntary connection and functions, with our mankind. They are 3, synthesized by the 4th, the first and highest, which is called the central sun in the Kabbalistic doctrine just quoted. This is the great difference between the Semitic and the Aryan cosmogony. One materializing humanizes the mystery of nature. The other spiritualizes matter, and its physiology is always made subservient to metaphysics. Thus, though the 7th principle reaches man through all the phases of being, pure and indiscrete element, and an impersonal unity, it passes through, the Kabbalah teaches from, the central spiritual sun, and group the 2nd, the polar sun, which two radiate on man his Atma. Group 3, the equatorial sun, cement the buddhi to Atman and the higher attributes of manas, while Group 4, the spirit of our visible sun, endows him with his manas and its vehicle, the kama rupa, or body of passions and desires, the 2 elements of ahamkara, which evolve individualized consciousness, the personal ego. Finally, it is the spirit of the earth and its triple unity that builds the physical body, attracting to it the spirits of life and forming his linga sharira. Now, as everything proceeds cyclically, the evolution of man, like everything else, the order in which he is generated is described fully in the Eastern teachings, whereas it is only hinted at in the Kabbalah. Says the Book of John with regard to primeval man when first projected by the boneless, the incorporeal creator, quote, "First the breath, then the buddhi, and the shadow sun, the body, were, quote, created," unquote. But where was the pivot, the middle principle, manas? Man is doomed. When alone, the indiscrete, undifferentiated element, and the vaham, buddhi, the coarser, the causeless, break asunder from manifested life, unless cemented and held together by the middle principle, the vehicle of the personal consciousness of jiva, unquote, explains the commentary. In other words, the 2 higher principles can have no individuality on earth, cannot be man, unless there is A, the mind, the manas ego, to cognize itself, and B, the terrestrial false personality, or the body of egotistical desires and personal will, to cement the whole as if round a pivot, which it is truly, to the physical form of man. It is the 5th and the 4th principles, manas and kamarupa, that contain the dual personality, the real immortal ego, if it assimilates itself to the 2 higher, and the false and transitory personality, the mayavi, or astral body so-called, or the animal human soul, the 2 having to be closely blended for purposes of a full terrestrial existence. Note on the 5th and the 4th principles. The 4th and the 5th from below beginning, by the physical body, the 3rd and the 4th, if we reckon from Atma. End of note. Incarnate the spiritual monad of a Newton grafted on that of the greatest saint on earth, in a physical body, the most perfect you can think of, that is, in a 2 or even a 3-principled body composed of its stula sharira, prana, life principle, and linga sharira. And if it lacks its middle and 5th principles, you will have created an idiot. at best a beautiful, soulless, empty, and unconscious appearance. Cogito, ergo sum, can find no room in the brain of such a creature, not on this plane at any rate. There are students, however, who have long ago understood the philosophical meaning underlying the allegory, so tortured and disfigured by the Roman Church of the fallen angels. The kingdom of spirits and spiritual action, which flows from and is the product of spirit volition, is outside and contrasted with and in contradiction to the kingdom of divine souls and divine action. Note. See New Aspects of Life. End of note. As said in the text, quote, like produces like, and no more the genesis of being, and evolution with its limited conditioned laws comes later. The self-existent are called creations, for they appear in the spirit ray, manifested through the potency inherent in its unborn nature, which is beyond time and limited or conditioned space. Note on the self-existent. Angelic spiritual essences, immortal in their being because unconditioned in eternity, periodical and conditioned in their momentary manifestations. End of note. Terrene products, animate and inanimate, including mankind, are falsely called creation and creatures. They are the development, evolution, of the discrete elements. Unquote, Commentary 14. Again, quote, the heavenly Rupa, Dhyān-Khochan, creates man in his own form. It is a spiritual ideation consequent on the first differentiation and awakening of the universal manifested substance. That form is the ideal shadow of itself, and this is the man of the first rays. Unquote. To express it in still clearer form, limiting the explanation to this earth only, it was the duty of the first differentiated egos, the Church calls them archangels, to imbue primordial matter with the evolutionary impulse and guide its formative powers in the fashioning of its productions. This it is which is referred to in the sentences both in the Eastern and Western tradition. The angels were commanded to create. After the earth had been made ready by the lower and more material powers and its three kingdoms fairly stated on their way to be fruitful and multiply, the higher powers, the archangels or dhyanis, were compelled by the evolutionary law to descend on earth in order to construct the crown of its evolution, man. Thus the self-created and the self-existent projected their pale shadows, but group the third, the fire angels, rebelled and refused to join the fellow devas. Hindu exotericism represents them all as yogins whose piety inspired them to refuse creating, as they desired to remain eternally kumaras, virgin youths, in order to, if possible, anticipate their fellows in progress towards nirvana, the final liberation. But agreeable to esoteric interpretation, it was a self-sacrifice for the benefit of mankind. The rebels would not create will-less, irresponsible men, as the, quote, obedient, unquote, angels did. Nor could they endow human beings with only the temporary reflections of their own attributes, for even the latter, belonging to another and a so much higher plane of consciousness, would leave man still irresponsible, hence interfere with any possibility of a higher progress. No spiritual and psychic evolution is possible on earth, the lowest and most material plane, for one who on that plane at all events is inherently perfect and cannot accumulate either merit or demerit. Man remaining the pale shadow of the inert, immutable and motionless perfection, the one negative and passive attribute of the real I am that I am, would have been doomed to pass through life on earth as in a heavy, dreamless sleep, hence a failure on this plane. The beings, or the being, collectively called Elohim, who first, if ever, pronounced the cruel words, "Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil, and now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever," must have been indeed the Ildabaut, the demiurge of the Nazarenes, filled with rage and envy against his own creature, whose reflection created Ophiomorphos. In this case it is but natural, even from the dead-letter standpoint, to view Satan, the serpent of Genesis, as a real creator and benefactor, the father of spiritual mankind. For it is he who was the harbinger of light, bright radiant Lucifer, who opened the eyes of the automation created by Jehovah, as alleged, and he who was the first to whisper, "In the day ye eat thereof, ye shall be as Elohim, knowing good and evil," can only be regarded in the light of a Saviour, an adversary to Jehovah, the personating spirit. He still remains in esoteric truth the ever-loving messenger, the angel, the seraphim and cherubim, who both knew well and loved still more, and who conferred on us spiritual instead of physical immortality, the latter a kind of static immortality that would have transformed man into an undying, quote, wandering Jew, unquote. As narrated in King's Gnostics, Ildebarth, whom several sects regarded as the god of Moses, was not a pure spirit. He was ambitious and proud, and rejecting the spiritual light of the middle space offered him by his mother, Sophia Akamot, he set himself to create a world of his own. Aided by his sons, the 6 planetary genii, he fabricated man, but this one proved a failure. It was a monster, soulless, ignorant, and crawling on all fours on the ground like a material beast. Ildebarth was forced to implore the help of his spiritual mother. She communicated to him a ray of her divine light, and so animated man and endowed him with a soul. And now began the animosity of Ildebarth towards his own creature. Following the impulse of the divine light, man soared higher and higher in his aspirations. Very soon he began presenting not the image of his creator Ildebarth, but rather that of the supreme being, the primitive man, Enoia. Then the demiurgus was filled with rage and envy, and fixing his jealous eye on the abyss of matter, his looks, envenomed with passion, were suddenly reflected as in a mirror. The reflection became animate, and there arose out of the abyss Satan, serpent, Ophiomorphos, the embodiment of envy and cunning. He is the union of all that is most base in matter, with the hate, envy, and craft of the spiritual intelligence, unquote. This is the exoteric rendering of the Gnostics, and the allegory, though a sectarian version, is suggestive and seems true to life. It is the natural deduction from the dead-letter text of chapter 3 of Genesis. Hence the allegory of Prometheus, who steals the divine fire so as to allow men to proceed consciously on the path of spiritual evolution, thus transforming the most perfect of animals on earth into a potential god, and making him free to take the kingdom of heaven by violence. Hence also the curse pronounced by Zeus against Prometheus, and by Jehovah Ildebarth against his rebellious son Satan. The cold pure snow of the Caucasian mountain, and the never-dying singing fire and flames of an extinguishable hell. The personified emblem of Phosphoros, of the astral fire and light in the Anima Mundi, that element of which the German materialist philosopher Moleschott said, "Ohne Phosphor kein Gedanke," that is, without phosphorus no thought. Burning in the fierce flames of his terrestrial passions, the conflagration fired by his thought, discerning, as it now does, good from evil, and yet a slave to the passions of its earthly Adam, feeling the vulture of doubt and full consciousness gnawing at its heart. A Prometheus indeed, because a conscious, hence a responsible entity. Note, the history of Prometheus, karma, and the human consciousness is found further on. End of note. The curse of life is great. Yet how few are those men outside some Hindu and Sufi mystics who would exchange all the tortures of conscious life, all the evils of responsible existence, for the unconscious perfection of a passive, objectively incorporeal being, or even the universal static inertia personified in Brahma during his night's rest. For, to quote from an able article by one who, confusing the planes of existence and consciousness, fell a victim to it. Note, by an Englishman whose erratic genius killed him. The son of a Protestant clergyman, he became a Mahomedan, then a rabid atheist, and after meeting with a master, a guru, he became a mystic. Then a theosophist who doubted, despaired, threw up white for black magic, went insane, and joined the Roman Church. Then again, turning round, anathematized her, became an atheist, and died cursing humanity, knowledge, and God in whom he had ceased to believe. Furnished with all the esoteric data to write his War in Heaven, he made a semi-political article out of it, mixing Malthus with Satan, and Darwin with the astral light. Peace be to his shell. He is a warning to the chelas who fail. His forgotten tomb may now be seen in the Muslim burial ground of the Jonagad, Kachawar, in India. End of note. Quote, Satan, or Lucifer, represents the active, or as Monsieur Jules Besseck calls it, the centrifugal energy of the universe in a cosmic sense. He is fire, light, life, struggle, effort, thought, consciousness, progress, civilization, liberty, independence. At the same time he is pain, which is the reaction of the pleasure of action, and death, which is the revolution of life, Satan, burning in his own hell, produced by the fury of his own momentum, the expansive disintegration of the nebulae, which is to concentrate into new worlds. And fitly is he again and again baffled by the eternal inertia of the passive energy of the cosmos, the inexorable I Am, the flint from which the sparks are beaten out. Fitly is he, and his adherents, consigned to the sea of fire because it is the sun, in one sense only in the cosmic allegory, the fount of life in our system, where they are purified, disintegrated, and churned up to rearrange them for another life, their resurrection. That sun which, as the origin of the active principle of our earth, is at once the home and the source of the mundane Satan. Unquote. To demonstrate furthermore the accuracy of Besseck's general theory in Le Diable et Satan, cold is known to have a centripetal effect. Under the influence of cold, everything contracts, he writes. Under it life hibernates or dies out, thought congeals, and fire is extinguished. Satan is immortal in his own fire sea. It is only in the Niflheim, the cold hell of the Scandinavian Eddas, of the I Am, that he cannot exist. But for all that there is a kind of immortal existence in the Niflheim, and that existence must be painless and peaceful, because it is unconscious and inactive. In the kingdom of Jehovah, if this God were at all the Jews and Christians claim for him, there is no misery, no war, no marrying and giving in marriage, no change, no individual consciousness. Note, the author talks of the active, fighting, damning Jehovah, as though he were a synonym of Parabram. We have quoted from this article to show it dissents from theosophic teachings. Otherwise it would be quoted someday against us, as everything published in the Theosophist generally is. End of note. All is absorbed in the spirit of the most powerful. It is empathically a kingdom of peace and loyal submission, as that of the arch-rebel is one of war and revolution. It, the former, is in fact what Theosophy calls nirvana. But then Theosophy teaches that separation from the primal source having once occurred, reunion can only be achieved by will, effort, which is distinctly satanic in the sense of this essay. Unquote. It is satanic from the standpoint of Orthodox Romanism, for it is owing to the prototype of that which became in time the Christian devil to the radiant archangels, the Anthropogenes, who refused to create because they wanted man to become his own creator and an immortal God, that man can reach nirvana and the heaven of heavenly divine peace. To close this rather lengthy comment, the secret doctrine teaches that the fire devas, the Rudras and the Kumaras, the virgin angels to whom Michael and Gabriel the archangels both belong, the divine rebels, called by the all-materializing and positive Jews, the Nahash or deprived, preferred the curse of incarnation and the long cycles of terrestrial existence and rebirths to seeing the misery, even if unconscious, of the beings evolved as shadows out of their breathing, through the semi-passive energy of their two spiritual creators. If man uses of life, should be such as neither to animalize nor to spiritualize, but to humanize self. Before he can do so, he must be born human, not angelic. Note: explaining the Kabbalah, Dr. H. Pratt says, spirit was to man, to the Jewish rabbin rather, a bodiless, disembodied or deprived and degraded being, and hence was termed by the ideograph Nahash deprived, represented as appearing to and seducing the human race, men through the woman. In the picture from this Nahash, the spirit was represented by a serpent because from its destitution of bodily members, the serpent was looked upon as a deprived and depraved and degraded creature. Unquote from New Aspects, page 235. Symbol for symbol, there are those who would prefer that of the serpent, the symbol of wisdom and eternity, deprived of limbs as it is, to the Jod, the poetical ideograph of Jehovah in the Kabbalah, the god of the male symbol of generation. Unquote. Hence, tradition shows the celestial yogis offering themselves as voluntary victims in order to redeem humanity, created godlike and perfect at first, and to endow him with the human affections and aspirations. To do this, they had to give up their natural status and, descending on our globe, take up their abode on it for the whole cycle of the Mahayuga, thus exchanging their impersonal individualities for individual personalities, the bliss of sidereal existence for the curse of terrestrial life. This voluntary sacrifice of the fiery angels, whose nature was knowledge and love, was construed by the exoteric theologies into a statement that shows the rebel angels hurled down from heaven into the darkness of hell, our earth. Hindu philosophy hints at the truth by teaching that the asuras hurled down by Shiva are only in an intermediate state in which they prepare for high degrees of purification and redemption from their wretched condition. But Christian theology, claiming to be based on the rock of divine love, charity and justice of him it appeals to as its savior, has invented to enforce that claim paradoxically the dreary dogma of hell, that Archimedean lever of Roman Catholic philosophy. As to rabbinical wisdom, than which there is none more positive, materialistic, or grossly terrestrial, as it brings everything down to physiological mysteries, it calls these beings the evil one, and the Kabbalists Nahash, deprived, as just said, and the souls that have known themselves after having been alienated in heaven from the Holy One into an abyss at the dawn of their very existence, and have anticipated the time when they are to descend on earth. Zohar 3, verse 61, c. And let me explain at once that our quarrel is not with the Zohar and the Kabbalah in their right interpretation, for the latter is ours, but only with the gross, pseudo-esoteric explanations of the latter, and especially those of the Christian Kabbalists. Our earth and man, says the commentary, being the products of the three fires, whose three names answer in Sanskrit to the electric fire, the solar fire, and the fire produced by friction. These three fires, explained on the cosmic and human planes, are spirit, soul, and body, the three great root groups, with their four additional divisions. These vary with the schools and become, according to their applications, the upadish and the vehicles, or the noumena of these. In the exoteric accounts, they are personified by the three sons of surpassing brilliancy and splendor, of Agni Abhimanim, the eldest son of Brahma, the cosmic Logos, by Swaha, one of Daksha's daughters. Note: Daksha, the intelligent, the competent. This name generally carries with it the idea of creative power. He is a son of Brahma and of Aditi, and agreeably the other versions a self-born power which, like Minerva, sprang from his father's body. He is the chief of the Prajapati. The lords are creators of being. In Vishnu Purana, Parastara says of him, in every kalpa or manvantara, Daksha and the rest are born and are again destroyed. And the Rig Veda says that Daksha sprang from Aditi and Aditi from Daksha, a reference to the eternal cyclic rebirth of the same divine essence. End of note. In the metaphysical sense, the fire of friction means the union between Buddhi, the sixth, and manas, the fifth principles, which thus are united or cemented together, the fifth merging partially into and becoming part of the monad. In the physical, it relates to the creative spark or germ which fructifies and generates the human being. The three fires, it is said, whose names are Pavamana and Sukhi, were condemned by curse of Vashishta, the great sage, to be born over and over again. Bhagavata Purana 4.24.4. This is clear enough. Therefore the flames, whose functions are confused in the exoteric books, and who are called indifferently Prajapati, Pitris, Manus, Asuras, Rishis, Kumaras, etc., etc., are said to incarnate personally in the third root race, and thus find themselves reborn over and over again. Note: no one of these orders is distinct from the Pitris or progenitors, as is Manu 3.284. Quote, the wise call our fathers Vasus, our paternal grandfathers Rudras, our paternal great-grandfathers Adityas, agreeably to a text of the Vedas. Or, this is an everlasting Vedic text in another translation. End of note. In the esoteric doctrine, they are generally named the Asuras, or the Asura Devata or Pita Devata gods, for as said, they were first gods and the highest before they became no gods, and had from spirits of heaven fallen into spirits of the earth. Exoterically, note well in Orthodox dogma. Note: as now discovered by the late G. Smith in the Babylonian cylinder literature, it was the same in Chaldean theogony. Ishtar, eldest of heaven and of earth. Below him the Igaga, or angels of heaven, and the Anunnaki, or angels of earth. Below these again various classes of spirits and genii called Sadhu, Baduku, Ekimu, Gallu, of which some were good, some evil. See Babylonian mythology. End of note. No theologian, any more than an Orientalist, can ever understand the genealogies of the Prajapati, the Manus, and the Rishis, nor the direct connection of these, or their correlation rather, with the gods, unless he has the key to the old primitive cosmogony and theogony, which all the nations originally had in common. All these gods and demigods are found reborn on earth in various kalpas, and in as various characters, each, moreover, having his karma distinctly traced and every effect assigned to its cause. Before other stanzas could be explained, it was, as seen, absolutely necessary to show that the sons of dark wisdom, though identical with the archangels, which theology has chosen to call the fallen, are as divine as a pure, and more so than all the Michaels and Gabriels so glorified in the churches. The old book goes into various details of astral life, which at this juncture would be quite incomprehensible to the reader. It may therefore be left for later explanations, and the first and second races can now only receive bare notice. Not so for the third race, the root race which separated into sexes, and which was the first to be endowed with reason. Men evolving pari passu with the globe, and the latter having incrustated more than 100 million of years before, the first human sub-race had already begun to materialize or solidify, so to say. But, as the stanza has it, the inner man, the conscious entity, was not. This conscious entity, occultism says, comes from, nay, in many cases is, the very entire essence and esse of the high intelligences condemned by the undeviating law of karmic evolution to reincarnate in this manvantara. Next chapter is stanza 10, verse 39.